2003, we were at the end, 2003, 2004, we were at the end of the second intifada here in Israel. And it was, of course, a very terrible time for this city, a very terrible time for the economy. But the good news was that what you had in Israel at that time were hundreds, if not thousands of journalists covering the story on a daily basis. And in fact, I spoke recently to somebody at the Foreign Ministry who said that since that time, there's 40% less foreign correspondents in Israel today. So at that time, there were literally the most foreign correspondents that had ever been in Israel at that time. Now, I speak about foreign correspondents because as they were beginning to report the end of the Intifada, journalists, I speak for myself, are always looking for the next thing, the next story, the next best thing. And around just at the exact time that the Intifada was beginning to end, you saw the rise of two important things in Tel Aviv. One, you saw the UNESCO designation of Tel Aviv as a World Heritage Site, only the second modern city in the world to receive such an accolade besides Brasilia, which honored Tel Aviv's historic Bauhaus patrimony, the only one of its kind in the entire world. Number two, Tel Aviv's high-tech boom, high-tech miracle, economic miracle began to show itself in a robust and exciting manner. So you had these two things coming together. You had the UNESCO designation, architecture, you had the economy, high-tech, and you had lots of journalists here looking for a story. And in these two things, they found the story. Kind of a perfect trifecta, as I call it, a big bang. Now, that big bang resulted in a series of stories that began to speak of Tel Aviv as a sexy, exciting, innovative, compelling destination. Here at Wallpaper, for example, we wrote our guidebook very early, and Tel Aviv was on the very, very first shlav of cities to receive a city guide. So Tel Aviv was one of the very first to have a city guide. Magazines such as my own Wallpaper, as well as other magazines around the world, immediately began to write about architecture, high-tech boom, economy, innovation in the face of struggle. We all like those kinds of stories. A success story in the face of hardship. It was a perfect story for the media. And the best part about it was these were the kinds of things that organically drew visitors to Israel. Once they heard about architecture, it drew culture tourism. Because of the high-tech boom, it drew business tourists. And immediately, what they found here were the kinds of things that they were reading about, and they were able to go back and spread the word as well. So not only did you have the media spreading the word, but you had people here as well, tourists who were experiencing these things firsthand, also spreading the word. Also, what's important is that these things were rather high culture phenomena, coming, learning about architecture, and learning about Bauhaus. These are not simple things. It's not about, it's not mass, it's class. And so Tel Aviv was able to lure immediately the kinds of attention that gave it a sense of cultural importance and cultural uniqueness. Next, please. At the same time, once Tel Aviv had its initial sort of media boom, the good news was that the economy began to recover. And as the economy began to recover, you saw the arrival of here's Sushi Samba in Ramat Chayal. You saw the arrival of all kinds of high-end, fancy restaurants, the consumer culture, which essentially existed in Tel Aviv to support you guys. It was part of the local culture, but it was a kind of thing that we as journalists love to read about. All of a sudden, not only did you have interesting architecture, interesting culture, but you had hip restaurants, you had cool, chic boutique hotels like the Montefiore that fit into the narrative of architecture, of culture. So you had what we needed as journalists to report the story. You had culture, you had hotels, you had restaurants, you had everything we needed to say, come to Tel Aviv. And it's fair to say that people did come to Tel Aviv. Quite quickly, in about 2007, 8, 9, every major publication in the English-speaking world, I can only speak for the English-speaking world, began to report on Tel Aviv. Travel magazines reported on travel. Fashion magazines like W reported on fashion. Food and Wine reported on food. And Maxim reported on hot, sexy Israeli girls. And we all like that. So, okay, at the same time, one more important thing happened. You had the arrival of gay tourism and gay culture in Israel. Now, although in sheer numbers, this is quite a small thing, what it did was it gave Tel Aviv a sense of an instant stamp of approval by a cutting-edge, sophisticated tourist. It also gave Tel Aviv it showed Tel Aviv having a symbolic commitment to liberal, progressive values. And that is a very, very key thing. By supporting, Tel Aviv right now is spending $80,000 to lure gay tourism. So by supporting this kind of tourism, it says very clearly Tel Aviv is an open, tolerant, liberal society. I'll get back to that in a second later on, but that cannot be stressed more important how we as media like that message. Okay, so now that's not Tel Aviv. That's Miami. So Tel Aviv has this conflation of specific circumstances that brought it to its own media image. Now, it's not alone in this. Now, Miami is sort of like America's Tel Aviv. It's a city on the beach. It's full of modernist 30s and 40s architecture. It has a diverse population, a robust financial sector, and there's a lot of Jews. So, America's Tel Aviv. Now, that's not one of them. Now, 30 years ago, in 1979, Miami had the distinction of being the most crime-ridden city in America, as embodied by our friend Tony Montana, aka Al Pacino, in the famous film Scarface. Miami was the center of drugs, cocaine, violence, and all kinds of bad things. He was a perfect example of this. This movie takes place in Miami. Now, over the 20 years since this film happened, people began, like they did in Tel Aviv, to trickle into Miami, to rediscover the architecture, to rediscover the beach, to rediscover the core elements that were organically in place, and that helped propel Miami's status to one of international appeal. First, the architecture and the culture fans came, then the fashion fans came, then the style fans came, then the food fans came, and the business fans came. Also, like Tel Aviv, Miami had a very, very important business boom. Miami, because of its location and proximity to Latin America, became the headquarters of most multinationals trying to operate in Latin America. And in doing so, it established its own importance as a financial sector, regardless to New York. And that's a very key point, as one of the previous people spoke about Tel Aviv becoming a financial sector in its own right as well. Miami became a financial sector in its own right.